This video is sponsored by MyHeritage. Try their 14-day free trial right now so you can look into your own family history. After all, if you want to learn about history, it's best to start with your own.
I cannot live another day without air conditioning.
Says tomorrow's gonna be hotter.
Hotter?
Like yesterday.
Yesterday you said you'd call Sears.
I'll call today.
You call now.
I'll call now.
Now's the time to save on Sears installed central air conditioning. Get 0% finance charge, no billing, and no payments until August with the Sears Charge Home Improvement Plan. Call now for a free in-home estimate on a Kenmore air conditioning system. State-of-the-art engineering means greater energy efficiency. A new Kenmore could save 10 to 44% on your annual cooling costs. In time, even pay for itself. Sears also offers fast emergency installation, a 5-year warranty on parts and labor, plus our satisfaction guarantee. And you know Sears will be there to back it up. Get 0% finance charge, no billing, no payments until August. Offer ends May 31st, so call now and save with Sears.
So what's the paper say about tomorrow?
Another scorcher.
Cool.
Sears. A name that is, well, principal in the realm of retail. For years, they were the top retailer in America and a household name. For a long time, everyone, and I mean everyone, shopped at Sears on occasion. But now, it's no longer the case. They've fallen off. Hard. And I mean hard. They are but ashes compared to what they once were. What happened? Because it's impossible to overstate how large and successful Sears used to be. How could they possibly have fallen off this badly? Well, let's talk about it. But first, a word from our sponsor. For this video, I partnered with MyHeritage, an incredibly useful service to research history, but not just any history, your own. MyHeritage is the leading global service for family history research as well as DNA testing. They're trusted by 90 million users to help them investigate their own heritage. I mean, after all, we do history around here. In the dark. But if there's any history that shouldn't remain in the dark, it should be yours. They're the #1 family history service, and they offer a fun and easy way to build your family tree to discover your origins. Now, you might be saying, Darkness, what's with all the black bars? And, well, that's because I actually come from a pretty large and very alive family who probably, I would imagine, wouldn't want me to just spill all their info online, you know. But some of you may not have such a large extended family that you even know about. The thing is, MyHeritage gives you 20 billion, with a B, historical records to look at, and with their powerful Instant Discoveries tool, they automatically show you the relevant information for your own family. I, for example, wound up with a match involving my grandmother that took me down a rabbit hole of information regarding great aunts and uncles that I never got to meet as they passed before I was born. No, seriously, there's like 3 of them I had no idea about. I should really talk to my family more. Anyway, but this rabbit hole kept on going, just kept rolling. Onward. It led to my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-great... And what I found most interesting about this little deep dive into my own history is actually how long my family's been on the American continent. We date back to pretty much the beginning of the American colony's existence over here. My direct ancestors were here while we were still under British rule, which means, of course, that I'm not just American, but a super American. But seriously, the Instant Discoveries tool is a phenomenal asset that gives you exciting and interesting information about yourself at the click of a button. You can also upload pictures, and with precision AI technology, you can repair, enhance, and even animate or colorize them. As such, I'd love to invite all of you to take advantage of MyHeritage. Sign up for a 14-day free trial and start building your family tree and research your own personal history. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen. And with that, it's on with the video. The origins of Sears date back to a single individual, Richard Warren Sears. Yep, his name. I know, I'm sure you're utterly shocked by this startling revelation. He was born in 1863 in Stewartville, Minnesota. And his story is interesting because he's less rags to riches and more riches to rags and then back to riches again. Because when he was first born, his family was pretty well off. His father was rather successful and had a small fortune. But in 1879, his father managed to lose said fortune in a speculative stock deal that, well, obviously went very badly, and all the money was gone. Then his father died shortly after that, so it was a really bad time for the Sears family in general. He would then move across the state and began working a humble job as an agent at a railroad station in North Redwood. He worked that job for some time, though while he was there, something a bit interesting happened. One might say opportunity came a-knockin'. And by knocking, I mean a delivery came from one of the trains. Gold watches, to be precise, and it was from a Chicago manufacturer. Sears was only 23 at the time. The package required that the local co-signee, who was a jeweler named Edward Stegerson, accept it, but he refused it because the package was unsolicited. Now, why would he be receiving an unsolicited package of gold watches? Well, frankly, it was a scam. See, at the time, there was a pretty common method of scamming that involved wholesalers sending their products to retailers who hadn't actually ordered those products. Once the package was refused, the wholesaler would then offer a lower consignment cost in order to get them to actually take the products. The thing was that the original price they were quoted were well in excess of what the product was actually worth. So this lower cost wasn't actually really all that much lower. The wholesaler would still be making quite a bit of profit, but the retailer involved wouldn't necessarily know that and think they were getting a deal from the wholesaler as a result. Stegerson was well aware of the scam and wasn't about to be played like a fiddle, so he should have said no even with the reduced price. But Sears was present for pretty much all of this. After all, he was working at the station, and he felt that this was an opportunity for him. The watches were nice, and he could certainly sell them for a profit in theory, so he decided to make an agreement with the wholesaler on his own. His methodology was simple. He agreed with the wholesaler that he'd be able to keep any profit he reaped from the individual sale of the watches as long as it was above $12, and he began offering the watches to other station agents along the railroad line for $14. This was actually a really good time to be selling watches. It was frankly perfect. They were in very high demand for several reasons. For one thing, especially the gold watches were a symbol of urban sophistication. Back then, this area was still very much out in the sticks, so people just saw the watches as they were fancy. But in terms of railways, well, they really had to keep track of time. Prior to them, there were actually no time zones at all, and the local time could vary from town to town. This was irritating for the railroads who wanted to stay on time, so they wound up standardizing the time based off of the time zones that we still use now. But because of new time zones, people had to keep track of the actual time of the day, and watches were just the best way to do that, so everyone wanted them. Sears decided to keep up this little venture, and within just half a year, he had netted himself $5,000 in profit, which was nothing to sneer at in those days. He would then move to Minneapolis and founded the R.W. Sears Watch Company. He started placing advertisements in farm publications and mailing flyers to potential clients, and he had a knack for writing promotions. His ads were rather personal, and they spoke directly to rural and small-town communities, urging them to purchase these items by mail order. That would be a pretty big deal for Sears' livelihood in the long term, though more on that in a second. The same year he started the Sears Watch Company, he met a man by the name of Alva Curtis Roebuck, and he was a watch repairman. They got along great, and Roebuck began to help Sears with the business. They moved the whole thing to Chicago in 1887, and that was the year they published their first mail-order catalog, offering the watches, but also things like diamonds and jewelry. But in 1889, Sears decided to sell the whole thing for $100,000, that's over $3 million in today's money, and relocated to Iowa. And initially he intended to become a rural banker, though just a few years later in 1892, he'd be back in Chicago to establish a new mail-order firm. selling, again, watches and jewelry, with Roebuck as his partner. This time the company was called the A.C. Roebuck Watch Company, though they would rename it on September 16, 1893, to Sears, Roebuck and Company, and started diversifying what kind of products they offered in their catalog. The thing about the catalog is that it completely changed how people, especially in rural communities, were buying things. Back then, most individuals outside of cities, like farmers, had to go to local general stores. The thing about those general stores is that for one thing, they usually had a pretty narrow selection of what was available. They didn't carry that many different items, and prices were often negotiated. There was a lot of haggling involved. The end result was almost always the same. Since the farmers just didn't know how much a lot of this stuff was worth, they wound up overpaying, which was good for the general stores, but not so great for the consumers, and a lot of these purchases were done with credit. But since this was back before things like credit scores, the storekeepers had to estimate a customer's creditworthiness. They didn't necessarily know whether someone could actually, pay them back. It was clunky, inefficient, and it resulted in a lot of problems, as you can imagine. But the Sears catalog was different. Not only did the farmers not have to travel to the nearest store to buy things, they could just order it via the mail, but on top of that, the products were published at very clear, specific prices. This is how much they cost, this is what you're gonna pay, period, end of discussion. Don't try to haggle us because you'll just be talking to a piece of paper. But this was good for the consumer too, because he wasn't really marking things up all that much. Enough that was reasonable and so that he could make a profit, but not so much that no one was willing to buy, because it was a fixed price. By 1894, that catalog was 322 pages long. Then they expanded their offering to things like sewing machines and bicycles and even automobiles by the 1900s. By that point, the catalog would be nearly 600 pages long. It was starting to become like a phone book, but it was working. Sales were over $400,000 in 1893, over $12 million in today's money, and over $750,000  2 years after that, over $20 million in today's money. If it sounds like things went perfectly this whole time, no, there were of course economic hardships that happened. The Panic of 1893 led to a full-scale depression, and it did put strain on the Sears company. So much strain that Roebuck couldn't handle it anymore, and he decided to quit. Sears would then offer Roebuck's half of the company to another Chicago businessman named Aaron Nussbaum. Nussbaum would bring in his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenwald, who, interestingly enough, Sears actually owed money to? But actually, they got along really well. Sears likely paid Rosenwald back at some point. But Nussbaum was a different story. They actually didn't really like his approach to things, and were at odds with the man, so they would both buy his interest in the firm out in 1903 for $1.3 million. Rosenwald proved to be a good fit for Sears. He started a lot of innovations, pushing for consistent management across everything, and diversifying what they were offering in terms of products further. Dry goods, consumer durables, drugs, hardware, you name it, they probably sold it. And in 1906, they took the company to Wall Street in a stock placement of $40 million, over $1.4 billion today. Due to this switch-up, though, they had to incorporate a new company, technically. So they established Sears, Roebuck, and Company. And while that did replace the original company, it did inherit the history, so they're the same, but also not. I don't know, it gets confusing. The point is, they took the company public, and the name changed. That's all you really need to know. And Sears themselves often considered the 1892 incorporation as their actual birthday, not the 1906 revision. So, yeah. But this was highly successful. They were the first major retail IPO in American financial history. They remained a component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average from 1924 to 1999. With all this extra investment cash, suddenly they could expand a lot more readily. They opened a catalog plant, like a whole plant, just for the catalogs. And they also established the Sears Merchandise Building Tower in Chicago's West Side. That was an anchor point for what would turn into a huge complex that included things like offices and laboratories, as well as mail-order operations. Rosenwald continued to steer the company quite well. The sales continued to rise as the 1900s wore on, but by 1908, Sears himself would resign, as his health was declining, and he would pass away in 1914 at the age of 50. He wasn't that old, but his cause of death was rooted in what was believed to be alcoholism. He had suffered from it for a long time. And yes, that does indeed mean that the man built one of the most successful retail chains in American history while absolutely hammered. Rest in peace, legend. But Rosenwald was perfectly fine to handle the company on his own, as well as many of the follow-up CEOs. He really believed in what they were doing, and they started acquiring other companies like the David Bradley Plow Company in 1910. That would lead them to be able to manufacture things like riding mowers, chainsaws, and tillers, which they would of course turn around and sell in their own stores. And, right, the stores. This has all been mail order so far, right? Well, not for long. They hit a significant problem in 1919 due to another depression that struck the nation's farms. Farmers had overexpanded a lot of their holdings, and it hurt a lot of industries. I remember rural customers were their major customer base, and because the farmers didn't have any money, well, neither did Sears. But Rosenwald, I can't stress enough, was a great boss, and he pledged $21 million. That's over $358 million in today's money of his personal wealth, like his money, in 1921 to bail out the company. That's a Chad move if ever there was one. And it worked. They were able to stay afloat, and by 1922, they regained their own personal financial stability. But in the 1920s, Rosenwald was thinking that perhaps this mail order thing, while it was great, shouldn't be their only thing. Like, what if we just, had a store? Like an actual store? Wouldn't that be neat? Rosenwald wanted to push into the urban American market, too. That's where most of the people lived. It made sense to consider, hey, what if we start selling stuff to, the millions of people that live in cities? He personally oversaw the design and construction of their first department store, which they built on land within their own complex they had in Chicago. It first opened in 1925. Rosenwald had resigned from the presidency the year before, but he was still chairman until he died in 1932. He spent the last years of his life as a philanthropist, trying to share his fortune with other people. Other fun facts about Rosenwald: he was Jewish, and a lot of his philanthropy was directed to help with Jewish reform at a time when anti-Semitism was a cultural norm. But he didn't just stop with his own people. He was deeply concerned about justice for everybody, especially African Americans. I'm sure most of you are aware that African Americans struggled badly under exceedingly racist policies in the early 1900s. Slavery may have been over, but there was still a long way to go for equal rights, and Rosenwald would even serve on the board of directors of the Tuskegee Institute from 1912 until he died. And he gave the institute a whole bunch of money so that Booker T. Washington didn't have to spend so much time fundraising and focus more on making the Institute the best learning facility it could possibly be. I know this is a bit of a distraction, but I just wanted to stress Rosenwald was actually a really great guy. When asked about why he did what he did, he simply said, "What I want to do is try and cure the things that seem wrong." Rest in peace, legend. But back to Sears, because that's what we're all here for. The first store, despite being experimental and being located on the outskirts of Chicago, not really in the business section of the city, did really, really well. Really well. People loved it. They came from all over to shop there, so they kept opening more stores, often placing them in lower middle class and working class neighborhoods, away from the shopping district downtown. That was really weird at the time. Nobody ever did that. Everyone almost always put the stores, where the other stores were. But Sears went against the grain and placed their stores in, frankly, more convenient places for people to shop. They didn't have to drive all the way downtown to get to the store. They were right there. Granted, people that lived in the city had to travel, but they had really good public transportation back then, quite frankly. There were streetcars. Streetcars are awesome. We need more streetcars. Don't you show me those buses. Get out of here. Streetcars. Trolleys. I love them. Anyway, and the stores themselves weren't just interesting in terms of where they were located. They also had unique designs and an unconventional mix of products. Many of the stores were designed by the architect George C. Nimmons, and the design of the store was driven not necessarily by desired aesthetics, but the merchandising needs of the store. They put the product first. They were like, what are we selling? Well, let's design a building around the product. Not a building and just throw products in. We're gonna actually make a building for the product. And it resulted in what we would call modern architecture. Very distinctive style back then that was unique. So despite not even being built necessarily for aesthetics, the aesthetics got people's attention. They were interesting. People saw the buildings and were like, what the heck is that? Why does that building look like that? Oh, it's a store? Let's go see what it is. Oh, it's got Sears on it? I have their catalog. We can buy Sears stuff right here, in this neat place. It all meshed very well together. By the 1930s, the stores were designed fully air-conditioned, which I know is a given now, but back then it was not so.
I cannot live another day without air conditioning.
They were also windowless, encouraging people to come in to see what was in there, and not get distracted by things that were outside. And they were also very good at catering to both men and women. The stores included things like hardware and building materials, whereas a lot of general stores still focused on things like jewelry, purses, and other more female-oriented things. Sears carried stuff for absolutely everyone, so often whole families would come to shop there, not just one or two members, and they never really pushed for the latest clothing fads. Instead, they offered practical clothes, and very durable, good quality clothes. And of course, the staple for more modern department stores was that they could allow the customer to select goods without the aid of a clerk. By 1933, at the height of the Great Depression in fact, Sears decided to push their catalog once again, issuing what was known as the Sears Wish Book. It was a very popular Christmas-themed catalog that would be released annually by them for many, many years, until 1993 to be precise. It was a big deal, actually, especially for kids, who for many decades would often sift through this specific catalog and circle things they wanted Santa to bring them. And it was indeed a separate catalog from the main, regular, year-round Sears catalog. But it became an American tradition for a long time. Into World War II and the 1940s, Sears started to expand to other markets outside of America, opening their first stores in Central America, and their first one in Mexico City to be precise, in 1947. They would push into Canada as well, and the stores were so successful that the mail order thing kind of became redundant at a point. People weren't as interested in mail order all of a sudden. With the rise of personal vehicles, people enjoyed going out, and enjoyed, well, shopping. Especially into the 50s when the economy was really good in America, and people had a lot of money. Everyone had cars, everyone bought houses, and everyone went out shopping and bought stuff at Sears. It was good times. That was also about the time they started expanding into things like malls. And in the late 1900s, Sears was very much known for being mall anchors. And they weren't just doing sales anymore. In the 1930s, they created the All-State Insurance Company, which I'm sure you've seen commercials for. And over time, they established a whole bunch of brands that I'm sure many of you are aware of. Die Hard, Silvertone, Supertone, Toughskins, Craftsman, Kenmore, just to name a few. A lot of these were good quality brands that were trusted by people. And of course, you could get them at your nearest Sears. Or in the catalog if you didn't feel like going out. In some categories, they got so good and so successful that they started attracting the attention of, the government and, antitrust laws. Like, are you guys forming a monopoly? That's not allowed. In Sears' case, it was their purchase of David Bradley, which manufactured farm and lawn equipment. They did really well, but they had to break it up in 1962 because they sold more plows than John Deere. So Sears sold half of the factory to the Newark, Ohio company, and it would be later acquired by Roper Industries. Regardless of that issue, by the 1970s, Sears was at their peak. They were top tier, unstoppable. They were retail in America. You want to fight them? You want to go? They can't be taken down. They're too big to fail. Oh, yeah, well. So, in 1974, they completed the 110-story Sears Tower, located in Chicago. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, since it was the world's tallest building at the time, and had that claim for many years. But they only owned the tower until 1988, when they sold it. What, they built the tallest building in the world and then sold it within 15 years? Why? I mean, they're on top of the world. Literally. Well, in many ways, the Sears Tower kind of represents the, peak of their success. And it also shows what happens when you fly way too close to the sun, quite literally. Because it was right after the tower was finished that Sears started to go downhill. Slowly, but downhill. They would never regain their earlier successes, and they would start falling off every year after that. Slowly, painfully, brutally. Oh yes, it's about to get bloody. But, like always, it wasn't really all Walmart's fault. I mean, they didn't help. But in many ways, Sears kind of gave them the keys to the kingdom, because the top brass got violently complacent. Just a disgusting amount of complacency abounded. They decided to start expanding, looking into other avenues beyond their core business, and that's great, but as a result, they stopped paying attention to the core retail business. They just let it go. They began to diversify and bought things like Dean Witter and Coldwell Banker in 1981. Then in 84, they would launch Prodigy as a joint venture with IBM. Prodigy, mind you, was an online service that offered subscribers access to a broad range of network devices. It was an early version of the internet. Yes, technically, but also not really. They weren't an actual internet service provider. Prodigy worked a bit differently. It was very restrictive. It was an internet-style network, but just not really in the way we think about it at all. And then they introduced the Discover credit card in 1985, which is, well, a type of credit card. And these are all great and wonderful and whatever, do what you want, you're made of money, I get it, but none of this has to do with retail, except maybe the credit card. And because they weren't paying attention to retail, they also weren't seeing the changing landscape in retail. Remember, Sears was still, in effect, a department store. And department stores were very much on the way out. Big boxes were in. Companies like Walmart and Target were starting to really take hold among American consumers. People weren't going to Sears anymore. They were going to big boxes that had a whole bunch of stuff. You could shop at your own leisure, at your own pace, get what you want, and they often had very good deals, where Sears didn't have nearly as many of those. This shift happened pretty rapidly over the 80s because by 1990, Walmart surpassed them as the largest retailer in the United States. So suddenly, Sears had a problem. And what was their solution? Did you say reorient themselves, focus on updating their retail establishments, put money back into the business, offer some deals, things like that? No, you fool. Ridiculous. Their solution was panic. Panic. Everybody panic. Oh my God, we're going to die. They began divesting all of their non-retail entities. Everything they had put all that money in during the 80s, yeah, they were like, quick, get rid of it all. They're weighing the boat down. We're sinking. They spun off the financial services arm, which included their brokerage businesses and the Discover card, and they noticed their catalog was becoming cost prohibitive, so they discontinued it in 1993. This resulted in 50,000 people losing their jobs. In just the previous year, Sears posted a $3.9 billion loss. That was the largest ever seen from a retailer in America. It was horrid, awful, just what? How did you lose that much money? Things continued to unravel, and while discontinuing the catalog probably made a lot of financial sense, the problem was they didn't actually have anything that replaced it. While the catalogs on their own weren't necessarily profitable, people still used them to see what Sears had available in the store. A lot of people in the 90s didn't want to wait for the mail to come in to get their stuff, but they could look through the catalog and then go to a Sears to buy it. Without that, a lot of people simply didn't know what Sears had anymore, so they didn't go there at all. Had they had a replacement for the catalog, some kind of advertising vehicle, that might have been one thing, but they didn't. Didn't help that in 1992 they were successfully sued by the state of California. This is because it was discovered that Sears was, being a little unscrupulous in the automotive business. See, for a long time you could take your car to a Sears and get it fixed. That was a normal thing. That was cool. Alright, awesome. They had a habit of finding things that were wrong with cars that weren't actually wrong with cars. They were lying to the customers to get them to pay for fixes that didn't actually need to be done. And yes, criminal charges would later be filed over this. It was a big scandal. And as the 90s wore on and into the early 2000s, things only got worse and worse and worse and worse. It was awful. It didn't seem like they were doing anything right, and no one was shopping with them, and they continued to lose money. But don't worry, they have a great idea, a top-tier solution that will absolutely 100%, we promise, fix everything. In 2003, they opened up a new concept store called Sears grand. Absolutely. These stores were, honestly, just big boxes. That's basically what they were. They were just like Walmart, Kmart, Target. They were the Sears version of that. And they did carry everything that a regular Sears carried, and more. Hence the grand. Yeah. It didn't work. But in 2004, they were able to get a buyer. Someone to come in and save them, to buy them out and fix all their problems. And who could it be? This caped crusader, this hero, maybe not the one we deserve, but the one we need. It's... Oh no. Kmart, after just coming out of their own bankruptcy, because they were also inept, decided it was a really great decision. Just a stupendous, top tier, big brain decision to spend $11 billion of money that they did not have, that they could have spent on themselves to reimage themselves, we just previously established in my video about Kmart, to buy Sears. And boy howdy, that was just the worst deal. The worst situation. I mean, probably great for some of the Sears stockholders who then got all that money, sold all their stock, and ran for the hills. I'm sure it was fine for them, but not fine for the companies involved. This was the stupidest thing that could have possibly happened for a bunch of different reasons. But more intrinsically, you have two struggling retailers. Originally, you had one, each separately. Each management had one. Now you're going to take two struggling retailers and put them together. These two retailers, mind you, compete with each other. They are in the same retail space. So you have two brands that directly compete, so you're competing with yourself, and they're both already struggling. And mind you, business doesn't work like algebra, okay? You can't multiply a negative by a negative and get a positive. That's not how that works in the business world. And believe me, it didn't work here either. As part of the acquisition, Kmart Holdings, along with Sears, were all transformed into a brand new Sears Holdings Corporation. The first order of business was a re-imaging campaign, and by a re-imaging campaign, I mean they renovated a lot of the Kmarts, converted them into a new Sears Essentials format, only to change them to Sears Grands, only for them all to not be profitable. Yeah, I was wondering, Eddie Lampert, why? Lampert was in charge of this whole thing, and he has been accused of stripping assets to line his own pockets from both companies. And there might be some truth to that, but he's never been found guilty of it. And at first, especially with Kmart, he did try to make logical decisions. He balanced Kmart's books. When they bought Sears, they were technically profitable. He was, early on, doing things right. It's just over time, things started changing, and he didn't seem to have a way to fix it. My problem with the whole Eddie did this on purpose theory is that, again, it's not clear, and it also ignores the simple possibility, and quite reasonable possibility, that perhaps Eddie and the people working with him might just be idiots. That is easily also possible, if not more likely, than this all being some ridiculous get-rich scheme to destroy both and run away with the money. But based on all of that, I think it's clear that nothing got better for Sears, and no, by 2010 they were no longer profitable, and between 2011 and 2016 they lost $10.4 billion. Their total debt exceeded their market capitalization in 2014, and it was $4.2 billion by the end of January in 2017. During these years, their only choice was to start closing down unprofitable locations. They shut down more than 3,500 brick-and-mortar shops, reducing that to just 695 by 2017. They began selling off other assets like Sears Canada, which also is defunct now, just so we're clear, and they had some interesting ideas. I know, what we'll do, we'll become a more tech-driven retailer. Why? Why would you ever think that was a good idea? Not only are there plenty of other stores also doing that, but your brand has never been associated with tech. Why would you think that would change all of a sudden? They did introduce a new loyalty program called Shop Your Way, which, yeah, that's great, but also everyone had those too by this point. They weren't super late to the online store, but Amazon was still destroying them in that department. They even partnered with Amazon briefly, which again seems like giving the keys over. But basically how it worked is that you could buy tires on Amazon and get them installed at a Sears auto shop location, which actually that kind of partnership does make some sense. But yeah, there were a lot of things going wrong, and they kept selling stuff. They even sold off Craftsman to Stanley Black & Decker Incorporated for $900 million. Craftsman was one of their principal brands, one of the things they were mostly known for, and they were just like, nope, sell it, get rid of it. We don't need those. Nobody even likes those. Don't be ridiculous! And they started looking into selling Kenmore, for appliances, things that actually sold well for them. And due to pricing issues, they stopped associating with Whirlpool Corporation, another appliance manufacturer that had worked with them for 101 years. But of course, none of this helped. It only made the situation worse over time. They had less stuff to sell, if they were selling anything at all. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections on October 15th, 2018. Right ahead of a $134 million debt payment they were supposed to make that same day. Oh, sorry, we're bankrupt! So sorry you can't have your money! And on November 23rd, they released a list of 505 stores. 266 of those were Sears that were for sale in the bankruptcy process, while all the others would be liquidated. But don't worry, guys! Eddie Lampert's here! He enjoys making terrible decisions. On January 16th, Sears Holdings announced it was going to remain open after he won a bankruptcy auction for the company with an offer to keep 400 of the stores open. The judge presiding approved a $5.2 billion plan by Sears chairman and biggest shareholder to keep things rolling. This deal, at face value, did seem good, though. It meant that roughly 425 stores, including 223 that were indeed Sears, would stay open and preserve 45,000 jobs. And at first, things started seemingly to improve. In April of 2019, they announced they were going to open 3 new stores with a limited set of merchandise under a new name, Sears Home and Life. So Bed Bath & Beyond. Do you see how well they're doing? Were you even paying attention? Well, obviously not, because they continue to go downhill from there. A total of 100 stores were closed by January of 2020, even before COVID hit. And I assure you, no, that did not help them either. And as of January of 2024, there were still 11 full-tilt Sears stores open in the mainland United States, and a single one in Puerto Rico. However, since then, they have steadily closed. The Palm Beach Gardens, Florida location closed in March, and the last New Jersey location also closed that same month. In July of 2024, they began to liquidate their store in Stockton, California, and later in July, they started liquidating another store in Union Gap, Washington. So basically, yeah, they're bleeding slowly. And over time, they've started being really bad to their veteran employees, like retired employees. Eddie Lampert, months after purchasing the remains of Sears from the holding company, threatened to not pay out the $43 million in pension payments that were supposed to go to 9,000 former Sears and Kmart employees. And in 2019, they claimed they were ending the life insurance benefits also for a whole bunch of those retirees. So, thanks, Eddie. Top tier work. You're like the anti-Rosenwald, aren't you? Actually, that probably is a good metaphor, because just a few months before they canceled life insurance, they handed out $25 million in bonuses to executives. Yeah. Bonuses for what? Ugh. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Sears is almost certainly on the way out, and I can't see them regaining their footing, especially not under the current management. Is nothing sacred anymore? Can't we just go to a Sears and be happy, enjoy our shopping experience? Is there anywhere in the world, besides the small handful of remaining locations, that you could still go to a Sears? Well, of course there is. In El Mexico! Why does this happen every time? I don't understand. It always seems to be Mexico here to save the day with these dead retailers. And indeed, Sears is alive and well down in Mexico. As I mentioned earlier in the video, their first location opened in Mexico City all the way back in 1947. But when the core business started struggling, the brass decided to get rid of the Mexican division effectively. In 1997, they agreed to sell 85% of Sears Mexico to Grupo Carso, a company owned by Mexican businessman Carlos Slim Helu, whose name I'm hopefully saying right. As it stands, they own 100% of the company now, and Sears Mexico boasts 92 different locations down there. So if you still want to shop at a Sears, you just have to go to Mexico. As for why Mexico seems to be good at retaining our old retailers, well, I've theorized that maybe online shopping hasn't taken off there, but people who actually live there insist that no, online shopping is a big thing down there too. So the only thing I can guess is that while online shopping is certainly an option, people down there just still enjoy going out and going to places to shop. Might be a cultural difference. It's hard to say exactly, but they're doing fine. And don't forget about MyHeritage. Click on the link in the description below or use the on-screen QR code to take advantage of their 14-day free trial and look into your own family history. And with that, a special thank you go to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Lord Off 444, iSurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Kettle Crosswhite, Josh Johnson, Kid of Brainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Dolinsky, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitson 131 just 232, Mark Holding, Mr. Terevel, Hayden DeGrow, Bad Train Puns Are Best, Kurt Forcum, Mr. Sleepy, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Liam Wright, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Dur Roushi, A Person 723, William Nemo, Dr. Racer 78, Shimasu, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, Ryan Weofer, Jared Brussel, Zintek M, Boss K, Orange Glass, Andy, The Conceptualist, Acoletti, Ohio Trucker 1, Windy City Rails, John Videola, AET Museum, NJ 1969, Extra Special J, Jonathan Coco, Kieran Tibbets, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.